Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Phil, as per usual. And today I am really, really excited because this is a connection through Steve Wood. I'm going to put Steve's episode also in the link so you can see that connection. But speaking to him about training in the UK connected me to Graeme Hill, who is doing some incredible work with adventure for all, high ropes for all, climbing for all. And we're really talking about adaptive programming for people with physical disabilities, but also those who are neurodivergent as well. Graeme, I'm going to just throw straight to you on this one. What's some of the background? How did you kind of get interested in this adventure for all? And then give us a little bit of detail about how long you've been doing it and what's your energy around it.
Yeah, so it was all started by working at a centre called the Calvert Trust Lake District, which is literally is in the Lake District in Keswick. And that was over 25 years ago. I started that organisation. I was already an outdoor instructor, but dipped into the disability side of things. And I think what really triggered it was firstly by seeing how well developed the centre was in terms of accessibility, but just that absolute core value that anybody should have an opportunity to go doing an activity. If they want to do it, if they've got those drives and those motivations to do it, then they should be enabled to do it. And what was quite significant about the Calvert Trust was that the detail that they worked to in terms of making that centre, making that activity accessible, and that set of values around it. So it was like any outdoor activity, it carries risk. If a person's got a disability, it carries additional risk. But if you look carefully through that activity and manage that risk, then that person can enjoy that experience. I do climbing and I do mountain biking myself. I get a real buzz from climbing. I enjoy the fear factor involved in it, and I feel that anybody, regardless of their ability, if they want to enjoy that experience, they should be able to enjoy that experience. But whereas part of the difficulty is there is a risk aversion there, so people will put blockages in the way. But that was the real driver towards it. So I carried on in that work, and I've done worked in disability now for the last 30 years. Basically.
It's interesting you talk about those blockages because I consider that myself as sometimes, let's say, a belayer on the ground is feeling not capable or able to accommodate the needs. So they're saying, no, I'm just here as a backstop for the physical activity of someone climbing. In risk management, I serve on a couple of risk management committees. Some part of the risk management and it's written down, is the physical ability of the climber or the physical ability of the participant on the course. And yet we use that sometimes as an oversimplification of like, that's the way to keep people safe, is actually make sure people are physically able to be able to do it instead of creating systems that will actually mitigate some of that risk. Is that what you see in some of the pushback as you've been doing this for so long? It's like, they just can't do it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unknowns, and I think it's really interesting what you just said then, Phil, is that those blockages can come from a number of different areas. So it may come from the family, it may come from the activity provider, it may come from the instructor, it may come from the assessor, it might come from the technical advisor. So you have to look at it quite holistically where those blockages occur. Quite often it will come from the family, because very often once the family has decided that their son or daughter can go to an activity, they actually get the most from it. The family gets the most from it because then they realise that it is the case. But it is, I think a lot of it is to use the term, is ignorance, and not before even exploring what opportunities and channels there are to make that activity. People just look at the risk factor. And another interesting point that you've just made there is looking at somebody, for example, with a physical disability. We will focus in on what disability that person has got. We won't focus in on what ability that person has got. So we're immediately making judgments about that person before we've even spoken to them to ask them. Like I've just had a conversation with a lady who wants to attend a Climbing for All course, and her attitude was, let's see what this participant can do before we start making any kind of judgments. And there is a model around that where you talk about the strength-based approach to a person rather than the weakness based. And that's it's attitudinal. Is that we as instructors and providers, we need to get into that habit of focusing in on what a person can do instead of what they can't do.
There's no doubt people who listen to this have had this example very much, and this I'm talking about neurodivergence in terms of ADHD. But the number of times that when I worked outdoor education, we'd have school groups that would bring them to our facility, and the teachers, the first thing they would list is all the kids that had ADHD and say these will give you some grief, and those kids always ended up being the best because
Wow.
in
Yeah,
the
that's
outdoor
brilliant.
environment, that's where they thrive. In the classroom setting, that's not
Yeah,
where they
yeah, yeah,
thrive.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think about that with the physical component too, as like how many people are adding this limitation, as you said, focusing on the disability versus the ability. They're immediately telling you all of those. They're listing all of the things that will prevent them from being able to do something versus than saying these are the things
Yeah,
that they can do.
I think that's really interesting what you just said, and I think the nuances in that, in so much as a child in a classroom where they're being told what to do, will manifest that kind of behaviour, whereas in a green space where there's some freedom and it's not absolutely full of rammed with rules and things, that it will again manifest different behaviours. And I think that's a really interesting point that you've raised there. Again, providers having those skills to make judgments around that, to understand and say to a teacher, well, hang on a minute, let's just see how this young person behaves in this setting, and feeling confident in making that judgment. And I think that's all part of the learning process for an instructor. There are a lot of young instructors that are able to do that, because I'm finding now quite a lot of instructors that I work with are neurodivergent themselves, but that has to be supported right through the network of that. So that instructor's got those capacities, but as the provider got the capacity to do it, as the training that they've done as that accommodated that side of it, of the administration staff got that capacity to support that. So again, it's just that holistic approach to it. But yeah, I mean, the point you hit on there, like I've said, like high ropes courses are brilliant because they're in green spaces, and it's like the point I raised that a lot of my work is in climbing walls, these very, very sanitized clinical environments. And I think that is detaching young people and adults from really, really quite critical environments in terms of being in green spaces. And that's why I'm really sort of excited about this, because I can start doing more delivery back outdoors in the rain and the wind and the sun and the snow. Because I just think
Yes.
it's so important. I think it's so important for growth, is something
Yeah.
like that.
Let's in your you were talking about the like holistic approach to it. In your ideal world, and it seems like my guess is that when you're leading some of these trainings, you're leaning with the primary instructors, the people who maybe are interacting with the participants. But in your ideal world, is the hope that you would also be working with some administrators, you'd also be working with all of the different levels, maybe family members, to be able to advocate for this in a different way, because I interact this a little bit. We do, the stuff that I do is I do training for ropes courses at a very basic level. I do non-normal scenarios, so it's rescue training. We do management training. But typically the interactions that I have that are the problem ones it tends to be with administrators advocating for these kind of programs to happen in the first place. Do you think that that's a little bit of the barrier? It's almost like you're putting a plaster on a problem rather than solving the problem?
Well, it's really interesting that you've raised that question, because I'm just about to do some training with a centre, and they asked specifically that all of their staff, even right up to senior management, will come on the training. So it's almost like you've anticipated
That's
there,
wonderful.
Phil.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
um, I mean, I've offered. There's an organisation called Access Sport that works in the UK, and they provide disability awareness training, but they do get all of the staff that are involved in that organisation. But this organisation, so the first session will be disability awareness training theory, but there are going to be booking staff, there's going to be house staff, there's going to be managers on all of that. And you're right, it is a sticking plaster. If the person who takes that first call can't handle that call, or ask appropriate questions, then the instructor's never going to see that person. So again, it's going back to where do the blockages occur? It's not necessarily with the instructor. You can't finger point at the instructor. It might be because that organisation hasn't advertised that it's inclusive, hasn't advertised appropriately, hasn't got the right staff to answer the questions, a person or the correct procedures around supporting somebody who's got additional support needs. Yeah, so yeah,
It's I wonder if you've noticed this because you work with this more intimately. In the last, like, 30 years, have you seen the general prejudice around disability deteriorate in a way that's meaning that there are more opportunities available? And because I sometimes have people who will say the argument of like, "Well, why are the numbers going up?" And I think, well, the numbers aren't going up, that just the awareness of the people is up, right? We're having more of these kind of conversations. Have you seen that there's more energy and excitement around this now than there has been in the past?
absolutely. There's loads more grassroots groups, organisations feel emboldened to move forward. Legally things are different now. So an organisation will work towards an agenda if there are legal requirements out there. And there's like, for example, the climbing is going to be in the Paralympics in 2027. So you get big events like that, and the Paralympics is a massive influence on people as well. So yeah, there's things are being much more sort of user led and grassroots driven. I would agree with that. The only thing I would say that is causing any kind of difficulty is just the health and safety side of things. As people are wanting to push things forward, I think potentially the representative bodies or the national governing bodies are getting a bit nervous about it, so they might place. I think climbing walls is a really interesting one because that's exploded, and there's so many people going into climbing walls now that they've had to sort of, excuse the term, dumb down things a little bit, so that because you don't want somebody falling off in a climbing wall when there's 200 people using that. So yeah, things have changed very significantly. Attitudes have changed massively, but I think sort of your operating procedures and risk assessments are tightening in a little bit and not necessarily moving at the same pace, which yeah, it's I've more to learn about the high road side of things, but I know in other industries that's going in the opposite direction in some respects.
Yeah, and I can certainly speak for here in America that we are interacting with that as an industry. Also, as frequency increases, more courses are out there, more of those bigger
Yeah, yeah,
organizations, maybe federal, state level, are taking notice. And there have been restrictions added to the work that we do that are limiting, right? So when they introduce that you have to use this style of harness, that might limit people because now we're unable to find other ones to meet different body shapes and styles and all of those kind of things. So it does create some limitation. I wonder if let's talk if we can, because we've talked a very philosophical. Let's talk a little bit more of the technical side of things for those people who are those tech
yeah,
nerds out in the audience.
yeah, yeah,
What I looked through some photos, I think that it was on LinkedIn of a recent training that you had led, and I was impressed to see or excited to see that there wasn't necessarily in the technical world, it wasn't like you were bringing out a piece of hardware that is going to adapt things. It looked to me that you were building pulley-based 4-to-1s, 5-to-1. There were systems that were used. From our perspective of the organization we work, we're always, if we can, we're technique versus technology. If we can create skill sets that people can use to adapt to different programming, that always seems to be, for our perspective, a little easier than saying, go out there and buy a £1,500 piece of equipment and that might solve your issue. Is there, when you do the tech trainings, is there a little bit of either or both of those where like this system can be the solve or this technology can be the solve? What are you teaching around
yeah.
the
I
adaptive
think
programming?
yeah, it's a really good question, that, because I think it's, without getting too philosophical, again, it comes back to the person that you're working with, finding out what their strengths are and then adapting your system to that person's strengths. But to answer directly to your question, there's barely anything that we use that is made specifically for the activities that we deliver. I mean, the harness that we have is based on the model of a paragliding harness, which has been used in centres like the Calvert Trust and Bendrig Trust for over 30 years, 40 years. We might add a couple of other bits in, like a bridle, but again, it's an off-the-shelf item. So the focus is on about, look at the kit you've got there and let's make it work. And it's interesting that you asked that question, because that's very much the model that I work to particularly, but the Calvert Trust that I spoke about earlier, that's the model that they work to, is make your environment work around the person that you're working with. Don't try to change your environment too much. Just try to adapt it. And I think, again, that comes back to your provider having that confidence to do that. So, just to give a little example, somebody's got a physical disability, they've not got much muscle around the legs and the hips, and they sit in an access harness, and they can feel the harness rubbing on the legs. So the simple process is you just get a little bit of foam padding just to put between their legs and the harness. And again, people, it sounds really simplistic, that, but people still need that confidence to make decisions like that, because they think, oh, this is a disabled person, the risk attached to it is much higher, and I don't want to get into trouble in doing anything. But yeah, and then your kit. Yeah, you mentioned the 4-to-1 pulley system. If somebody's a little bit heavier, you just put another ratio into the pulley, and
Mhm.
it's again, it's not a disabled person you're assisting. It's somebody who's just a little bit heavier, so they just need an extra ratio into that system. But yeah, I mean, it's funny you talk about the technical. It is the bit that really sort of excites people when we start doing
Yeah.
whenever I run a
I
course.
It's always, and I think that you probably have this, and I have, my supervisor at High Five is big into rock climbing. He did rock climbing way more than he's done ropes courses, and I think that what is, when you have someone who's, there's so much adapting to environments in the ropes, in the rock climbing, because you're on a natural face, and there's lots of different elements, and you have to be adaptive in a ropes course environment where there's stuff that is stationary and it's fixed. Sometimes it feels like, well, I'll just buy a piece of equipment in this one area that I know is a risky area. I can just add this equipment and it'll solve the problem there. The thing that I've always argued is that what that does, though, is it makes instructors limited to one fix, one problem instead of the adaptive. And I think one thing I want to highlight is what you haven't been saying is, you haven't been saying we need to build courses specifically for the disabled audience. You've said we're adapting, and it's adaptive
Yeah.
programming. And I think I wonder if, going back to maybe to the psychological, do you feel that you've seen, when you adapt a program, does it psychologically feel more accommodating to those individuals than maybe saying, we've made this entire thing for you? If you adapt something, it feels like we're making it usable for them, and not saying like, we need to fix everything because of what's going on with you right now.
Yeah, it's almost like the model of disability, isn't it? Is the thing I like about it is that getting from your dormitory to that activity, and doing the activity as a journey, and making that whole process a journey, that we'll go to this activity today and we'll do this activity, and you're part of that journey and part of that decision making. Yeah, that is the model that we try to encourage in this country, on the basis that not everybody's got an fully accessible ropes course. And you talk about reasonable adjustment. If you start laying down sort of guidelines that some organisations may not be able to afford at those areas, so I think the skill set should be in that adapting and having that confidence and that capacity to adapt.
Hmm. I also wonder as well, like, and I sort of made a reference a little bit, like sometimes the price is, I don't want to make this an excuse, but sometimes people say, well, in order to do this, I would have to increase the costs of my programming to accommodate for the extra cost of the, like money comes into this, plays into it. I, I'll throw a little bit. I wonder if I might edit this out, but I'll throw a little shade to one organisation, the Petzl, who you're probably very familiar with, right? So Petzl helmets. I was having a conversation with one of their staff members, and we're talking about helmets because helmet sizes aren't for people who have larger hair or religious headwear, like they don't get big enough. That becomes a limiting factor. And I brought up to them, it would be great if there was larger helmet sizes. And the person said to me, well, the market isn't there. My argument was, well, the market's not there because you don't have the helmets for them. If you made the things, then there'd be a market for them, right? Like it's like the chicken or the egg scenario. Do you find that like do you find that money sometimes becomes the barrier for like, adapting because people will maybe argue that the numbers aren't there to accommodate the cost? There's not enough people who use the program who are disabled, so therefore I'm not going to make that change.
It could work a couple of ways. You'll use the money argument without actually properly researching it. And you might also use the money argument because you don't feel confident with making that move as well. So you can hide behind that a little bit. And for example, talking about school pupils, they will, if the child's got a disability, they will carry extra money with them anyway, which can be used to accommodate if an extra staff member's needed or an extra 20 minutes is needed to set an activity up. And it's a weak argument. It's used too much. But then, like I said, the organisation that I'm doing training with in a month's time, it didn't come into the equation, the financial. They have made that strategic decision to say, we're now going to make our centre inclusive. We're getting far more inquiries because additional needs schools are running at capacity. So there's more disabled kids going into mainstream schools. So it's just the financial side of it. It can be answered. It just takes a little bit of extra work, doesn't it? And I think it's about us as providers that we work with those organisations to give them the confidence to think differently about it. And I think Petzl are interesting because when you reference them, for years and years, their equipment has been used in accessible activities, all the Trust 40 years. But I do think with Petzl, there's not been a proper connection with that environment. And I think, I was talking to a gentleman who works for Petzl recently. He's been a lot more active in that side of things. And I think maybe that relationship might change over the next few years, in terms of an acknowledgement that an ID is used or a rig's used or an ascender's used in that setting, or even a gree-gree. I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah, I think it always goes back to, and it's not negative to say ignorance, but ignorance is essentially a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness. And
Yeah.
I think if people don't know that more of these programs are happening or more of the inquiries are coming in, then people just don't know to say, oh, we should actually be considering this. I think I'm always of the mindset, like, and I think that standards, when you create standards and you say that someone has to do something, I think that increases the potential for awareness to go up. I wonder if, some of the step might be to talk to some of these governing bodies, some of these larger organizations, and start to, say that these things need to be required. You need to have these conversations. I know for us at our org, we recently put all our staff through trauma-informed care programming and training because we realized that so many people that were coming to our programs were having trauma responses to fear and risk that we were just not capable of being able to handle. And I think sometimes one of the limits is that I just don't have the skills to be able to handle this particular audience. Maybe I don't have the skills and therefore I add that as a limit. And so I would massively advocate people who are listening to this to reach out to organizations that have training that offer this so that you can learn and become more comfortable, because comfort's always going to be, finances might be one limit, but comfort was probably going to be a larger one. It's like, I feel like I could do more harm than good. And that becomes the limit, rather than saying like, no, just become a little bit more educated. You don't have to be an expert. And I'm going to hope that maybe you would advocate for that. You don't have to be an expert in a field to feel like you're going to accommodate some of the needs of some of these participants.
Yeah. I mean, obviously safety is absolute paramount, and I think COVID caused some issues because there was a skills fade, and so the big representative bodies are having to have a big front load, a lot of stuff around getting people back up to what they consider safe levels. But I think there needs to be more emphasis on this training around what you were talking about, like trauma informed learning and disability awareness, that it needs to be pushed to the front a bit more in terms of your continual professional development. At the moment, it's still seen as peripheral, very peripheral. And I just, my feeling is that if you go on that training, you'll just learn so much, and it'll make your relationship with the participant very different. Just exciting, just going into those new areas, and in terms of being stimulating. And but there's just people just a little bit nervous, aren't they? Like you say,
Yeah.
we're cautious over things like that.
I know. I also wonder, and it's probably the same in the UK. It's certainly happening in the US, where we actually, as a ropes course provider, we actually aren't building stuff that is 60, 70 feet, or I come trying to do the math and the meters, but we're not building stuff that's really, really tall. We're actually building stuff that is it's relatively lower because we're trying to make things that anyone can do. Whereas I think if you went back to the origins of these courses, we've got confidence courses and the military and all of these kind of things. They were all designed around extreme experiences. How do we make stuff scarier for the people who aren't scared? Whereas what we're actually saying is that's what you're trying to bring more people in. So having lower courses, having more stuff that everyone can do is probably going to be the future of the industry anyway. And so we're sort of seeing some of that cresting of like, I think some people I've interacted with are like, well, that's not scary. It's like, and I say for you, right? Like that's the energy. Sometimes instructors can be very kind of it's ego driven a little bit in the industry. If you're in this industry, you're kind of
Yeah,
hardcore, you know?
basically, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in that, because you might have two non-disabled people. One of them wants to go 1 foot off the floor, and another one wants to go 60 foot off the floor. So you make those judgments and those decisions, and it's the same with a disabled person. The only issue I have with a disabled person is that they might not be allowed to make that decision and to make that choice. And I think that's where some of the blockages. So I mean, I'm going to reference. There was a picture of a woman who's been doing accessible climbing in a centre in South Wales for a number of years, and the centre actually got her outside onto an outdoor crag. And I looked at, I know Andy who sort of all set it up with the climbing wall, and it looked about 60 foot off the floor, this outdoor crag, and she was on a vertical hoist. I think it was a 3-to-1 pulley system. But she had a smile as wide as a Cheshire cat on her face, and her dad was with her. And I'm sat there thinking, I mean, that just embodies everything for me. She is enjoying that moment as much as I do when I'm climbing 100 foot up off the floor, and the whole process has valued her, what she wants to do, and enabling that experience to happen and to share it with her dad. And I just thought, I mean, Andy, who's done all the work, he said it was the icing on the cake, and it was to me, because she got to the place that she wanted and enjoyed that experience. Again, build your courses high, build your courses low, give options for everybody, how you promote it, empower that person to make that decision. If they want to step outside the dormitory door towards that activity and then go back into the dormitory, that you value that decision that person's made. If they want to go 150 foot up, then let them do it, as long as it's safe.
Yeah. And I wonder, as you sort of highlight something for me, like there's a I can't think of many images that I've ever seen of people doing some of this stuff. So maybe there's a marketing
Mm.
component to this as well. It's like we just aren't promoting that this is an option. How many places when you search
Yeah, yeah.
high ropes course or adventure park or climber do you see people who are not physically able or normal, let's say, quote unquote, the typical, neurotypical? You don't see those kind of different experiences on it in a social media aspect.
No, no. I mean, again, I do think that's changed quite a lot. There is a lot more imagery out there. It's just that this picture seemed to embody everything. They didn't have a professional photographer. I think it was Andy who took it, but he just took it at the right time, at the exact right moment in time. But yeah, I think, there is a lot more imagery out there now. But do the public understand what we're trying to get, the message that we're trying to get across? We don't want those people patronising. We want them to look at that picture and say, that person's smiling because they're enjoying that experience. And That again, that's something that we have to work towards, about valuing that moment.
Let me just maybe wrap up this conversation. What would your message be to people listening to this around, like, what's your goal 10 years from now? Where do you hope the industry has moved to maybe accommodate some of the work that you're doing?
That providers are fully inclusive, and by the word inclusive, it means, well, it's a very broad term, but they will accept anybody regardless of their ability. But it's not just about enabling that activity; it's supporting people through that journey from the house to the actual activity, making sure that all the information's accessible. If parents have got questions, that they can be answered. So that's ultimately, that if a person wants to do an activity, that they can do it, that they've got full support through the whole journey to do that activity. I just think, I mean, Steve has asked me, we may be looking at building a chapter into their guidelines, into the UK guidelines. I've asked that it'll probably be a separate chapter at this point, built into the book, but then eventually it will become a fully embedded part of guidelines as part of that. And ultimately, that a disabled person is seen absolutely in no way different from a non-disabled person, that they're treated exactly the same and given the same opportunities. And it's an enjoy. I would finish off by saying it's a really, really enjoyable journey as an instructor or as an activity provider. Like you say, to see somebody who's had to go through more of a struggle to get to that point, but the feeling and the experiences they get from it is incredible.
Well, once again, thank you for doing the work that you're doing. So, so valuable, so, so important. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Phil.